Hello. Yeah. Yeah, we are starting live now. Okay. So, a very good evening to everyone. Namaste. My name is Tushar, and I will be moderating the session for today. I did my PhD followed by postdoctoral studies at Princeton University in electrical engineering. And currently, I am professor in waiting to join IIT Bombay Electrical Engineering Department. On behalf of Think India Pune chapter, I would like to welcome you all for this Facebook Live event with a very special guest. And we are today here also joined by some young professionals from Think India Pune chapter. Today, it's a matter of honor and privilege to have with us one of the most performance driven, a man of action who is well respected for his impeccable integrity, passion, and commitment towards society at large. Shri Suresh Prabhu. Sir, welcome to this live session. Thank you so much for giving us time. We are looking forward for a good discussion today. So before we start discussion, I would like to take some time to give background of our distinguished speaker. And so Suresh Prabhuji is currently official emissary of the Prime Minister of India and is responsible for official agenda of Government of India on key issues for G7 and G20 summit. He has held various cabinet portfolios, including Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Civil Aviation, Railways, Industry and Public Enterprise, Ministry of Power, Chemical and Fertilizers, and Ministry of Environmental and Forest. As a minister with Government of India, he introduced reforms in the power sectors with several measures that went a long way in protecting the environment and ensuring sustainable development by conserving the natural resources and bringing electricity to the remotest possible corners of the country. Known for his out of box thinking, he has scripted various reforms and effective organizational transformation. He has been guided by the dream and mission to balance the needs of human development while preserving the fragile environment. So today our distinguished guest will be speaking on the topic electricity, a lesson for reforming a key sector of economy. We will reminisce the journey of comprehensive power sector reform, which he steered as a power minister under Prime Minister Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji. So Suresh Prabhuji, thank you so much, and over to you.
So thank you, my dear friends, and thank you for Think India for giving me this opportunity to talk to the thinking India, the people who think all the time, for person like me who can actually outsource thinking to you and you can give back to me the well thought out ideas as to how do we develop India. So thank you for giving this opportunity. Let me dwell upon this very interesting topic, and you are putting me back into the history and also remembering those good old days when we are trying to reform the power sector. Let me give you a little background to this. In 1948, India had nationalized all the power sector, whereby we created integrated utilities, monopolies by state electricity boards. So each state electricity board had transmission, generation, distribution, all under one uh, entity, and that was owned by the state. Over a period of time, it turned out to be, when I became the power minister in 2000, almost 20, not almost 20 years ago, we realized that we are in a deep soup because the power utilities like state electricity boards had no money. The state governments which owned them had no money. And actually, thanks to some intervention earlier, when there was a National Thermal Power Corporation, National Hydroelectric Power Corporation were created, they could actually generate some electricity to feed into the grid. Otherwise, we would have been in a bigger soup. So as a result of that, we could see that state governments had no money, utilities had no money. And how do you then generate electricity at a time when the peak level shortage had reached an alarming level of almost 18%? As you remember the days when there used to be what we call, now we have forgotten that it is called load shedding, because that was a phenomena that we used to get constant power cuts and things like that. At that time, when I was a power minister, I also experienced something called grid failure. And why did grid failure happen? Because I used to give this example to the people that there was 15% power which was available under the central government discretion from the NTPC. And that power is to give it to various states. But the states during winter time, particularly in the north, had a big problem because they didn't have electricity and people were shivering cold. So there was a need for that. So people used to come, states used to draw more power than what was allocated to them. And a grid is a very fragile way that it operates. If you try to take more than what is available to you, it will collapse. So that's what happened. I used to give the example because it was a winter that in a Delhi, typical Delhi winter, on a street, you will find people using only one common blanket, and 4 or 5 people will try to sleep in the same blanket. When somebody turns his side, then one person goes out of the blanket. And that's what used to happen when there was a power cut like this. So we had all kinds of problems in the power sector. So grid failure, there was a theft and distribution losses, which were 50-60%. In Delhi, the transmission distribution losses were more than 50%. So you can imagine the challenges that we're facing. Quality of power was a problem. If you had a electricity connection, but the quality was so poor because there was constant failures of different kinds of systems. So all of that put together, we said, let's reform power sector. So when I started, and power sector reform was not talked for the first time by me, it was talked earlier. So I called all the top sector professionals and asked them, what is the power sector reform? And this is what I'm telling you is not a real story. So the top professionals told me, reforms are very good. I said, agreed. But what is power sector reform? I'm talking to about a professional. So they said, no, reforms are very necessary. I said, agreed, but what is power sector reform? They said, no, it is very imperative. I said, all of that, but what is sector reform? So nobody could define it. So I said, this is one of the reasons why we are not able to move on power sector reforms. So what we did was, we actually defined what is power sector reform for a common man to understand. And we had 2,500 road shows all over the country in the most cost effective manner. The road show would take place in a panchayat office or a school building, and that too will be explained to the people in the local language. So we took on from the power sector, such a large sector, we used all the human resource available who could communicate that in the local language to the people. In Odisha, we'll relate in Odia, in Maharashtra, we'll relate in Marathi, in Tamil Nadu, we'll relate in Tamil, and all of that we did to explain to people to first, to begin with, what is power sector reform. So the problem of reform is that the pain is front-ended and the gain is back-ended. So you first suffer the pain because tariff will go up, some failures will happen more, and the gains will come much later. So to have to explain to them to build a constituency. So that is what we did. After doing that, there was a bigger problem. That when we said we had to introduce more participation of power sector by private sector because government had no money, utilities had no money, and a power shortage meant that we needed more power. So if no money to generate more power, and at that time 1 megawatt used to cost 4 crores, and another 4 crores we needed to invest into sub-transmission and distribution. That's the thumb rule. So 8 crores per megawatt for generation, sub-transmission and distribution, and we had no money. How do you find it? So what we did was, I said we'll introduce the Electricity Act, which will actually allow generation of electricity by private sector companies, and will also create private sector participation into generation as well as sub-transmission and distribution and transmission. So to do that, there's a bigger problem because all the trade unions were opposed to this. So we had to explain to them. They were opposed to this not because they were opposed to per se, but because there was no communication. So after communicating to larger audience of people at large with 2,500 roadshows, I engaged in a discussion with all the stakeholders, particularly the trade unions, and we could explain to them properly. And then we introduced Electricity Act. I remember my colleague in the ministry at that time was so exasperated. He said, sir, you are talking and talking all the time. When are you going to bring the bill? I said, unless you create a consensus, Unless we create a constituency which is willing to accept the reform, which will never happen. And that's how we introduced the Electricity Act, and then it became a law over a period of time. But I will tell you, at that time, the share of participation of private sector into generation was over 2 to 3%. So today, after the Electricity Act, we got $250 billion of investment. Large number of companies came into transmit generation of electricity, and we delicensed generation. Because why should, when there is no electricity, why should you have license of electricity for generation? It was delicensed. People can come, people can start generating electricity. Only thing is that to ensure, because power is a very interesting issue, that electricity, when you generate, instantaneously it has to be consumed. So both have to be balanced properly, generation and distribution. So transmission becomes very important. So the load dispatch centers, the centers from where we'll manage the load properly, generation and distribution, we decided to keep it in the government. Otherwise, we actually made sure that private sector participation came in. But this reform was not just confined to this. And you asked me to speak on a comprehensive reform package. There's other problem. If you generate electricity and you distribute electricity, and if you are not going to recover the money, there will be a bigger hole. Because when we generate electricity of one, that time the capacity was 98,000 megawatts installed capacity. Today it is 350,000 megawatts. So just imagine how much more we are able to generate thanks to that one Electricity Act which brought in more generation into it. But a bigger problem, as I said, was that if you generate electricity and you don't get money for it, how will you survive? And therefore, we had twin challenges. First, about a present challenge of National Thermal Power Corporation, NTPC, which is to be supplying 1/3 of the electricity to the grid, and they were not getting money for it. At that time, the recovery rate of NTPC had gone below 50%. So I said National Thermal Power Corporation one day will become National Textile Corporation, NTC, like a Sikh company, if you don't do it. So we did something very different, first time in India. We said, if the state governments, because they were owning the state electricity boards, don't pay the power sector dues, then from the central devolution, which goes as share of state from income tax pool or custom pool, will recover from that devolution money, and then we'll pay to the NTPC. For that, we had to sign a tripartite agreement. We signed an agreement with Reserve Bank of India, state government and central government, that if in the event of default, the government has a right to recover and pay to the state utility. You'll be surprised. When we made this arrangement, tripartite agreement, payment security arrangement, as I said, NTPC's recovery rate was less than 50%. Today it must be 98, 99, or maybe even 95% plus, or definitely. Why? Because the fear of central devolution cutting forced the state governments to ensure that they will honor the obligations towards the state, towards the NTPC and other companies of central government. As a result of that, the NTPC health improved, but also in the process, state governments were forced to recover money from those consumers who are not paying. I give an example of Delhi. In Delhi, which is not a poor state, it's one of the richest city. There the transmission distribution losses were more than 50% because they were not recovery. There were air conditioners in somebody's house, 10, 20 air conditioners, and he was paying maybe 500 rupees per month because there was a corruption. So we actually decided to address that issue by first this tripartite agreement, whereby now the state governments were forced to recover from the consumer, because otherwise they don't consume, how will they pay to the central government? So this is how one set of things happened. The second issue was at real problem, because at distribution level, if the money is not recovered, it's a big problem. And just imagine in electricity, there are three stages: generation, transmission, and distribution. Now, when you finally distribute electricity where it is consumed by the end consumer, the distribution end, the value addition is very, very small. It may be less than 10%. So 90% value addition has already happened from generation and transmission. At the end, where the most value added product, the electricity, if you're not able to recover the cost, you have not only lost the money, but you have lost the most value added end of that, you have lost the money. So we decided to use that, how to make that happen. So I said, we'll make it in a way that let us not call power sector theft as a global problem. Let us localize it. Where is the theft that takes place? It takes place at the end of sub-transmission and distribution transformer. So I said, why not make each and every distribution transformer a profit center? That means that every distribution transformer, whenever there is electricity coming in, the person will be made responsible for accounting for it. If you account for it, then obviously you have received so much electricity, you must collect so much money and pay for it. If you make that accountability, it automatically goes down. So how do you win that accountability? So I got information and technology involved. At that time, I had invited Nandan Nelikani, who was CEO of Infosys, and I knew him as a friend, so I invited him. And we said, why not you do like this? Use ICT, information and communication technology, to find out how so much electricity coming in, why it is not accounted for and where it is stolen. Who is the person who is responsible for stealing it? We decided to make meters compulsory for that, and we started working on a distribution reform to make states agree for this, because this distribution is completely state-owned. So to agree for the state, first time in India, we got 40,000 crores, 40,000 crores sanctioned by the planning commission, through planning commission. That time there was a planning commission, cabinet approved it. And if state try to work on this to change the entire distribution network, bring accountability, bring transparency, improve recovery of dues, then the state governments will get some grant and some loans from the central government. Actually, this program called at that time was called APDP, Accelerated Power Development Program. And under that program, we introduced distribution reform for the first time in India. While we are doing this, we also introduced transmission reform. But transmission again was completely owned by the state government, by the government. So we said we can get participation of state governments into it. By doing this, the idea was that distribution reforms will ensure that power sector becomes commercially viable. If it becomes commercially viable, people will come and invest into it. We delicensed it, so generation end, lot of companies came and invested money. But if attendant distribution reform doesn't take place, the sector will not become commercially viable. So after some time, people will start losing money. To do this, we actually started the distribution reform. Unfortunately, later on the distribution reform part was not continued. And then even today, we have this problem of huge losses for the state electricity boards. At that time, we had completely taken the liabilities out of state electricity boards. It was taken over by the state government, and therefore the balance sheet of the state electricity boards made clean. If we had continued with that process, by now state electricity boards would have become cash rich, would have made more money, and not state electricity boards per se, because we trifurcated it and we call it distribution companies, generation companies, transmission companies. So all the three different functions of the power sector were created separate entities, so that will be transparency. We understand accountability, and therefore this will happen properly. So today, unfortunately, the power sector distribution companies are also in trouble for the same reason that we could not continue with the distribution reform that we had launched for the first time at that particular time. It was very important to make this happen, that we had a 6-level energy accounting, 6-level distribution reform. One of the principles was energy accounting. We first said we'll do energy audit. I said, I am a chartered accountant. How can you do audit if there is no account? So we said, let us introduce a system of accounting so that we exactly know where the energy is consumed, who is consuming it, why it is not being paid. So distribution reforms had a 6 levels, different levels of doing it. One of them was this energy accounting, other was decentralized billing, which was completely computerized, and we started working on getting it. In transmission, we also started getting FDI into transmission so that it will actually work better for them. We had each distribution transformer which I mentioned to you, and we also, because there was a problem was, even if I said we'll get new investment coming into the power sector, which came in a big way, as I can explain you the taste of the pudding in eating it. 89,000 megawatts of generation capacity has reached 350,000 megawatts of generation capacity, thanks to that Electricity Act, because private sector could come in. Otherwise, private sector was not allowed to come in. I used to give an example to people that mother is not giving food because she has no food, and father is not allowing the child to beg because he feels that will be a dishonor to the family. So that was the situation of a child. No food at home, We cannot beg outside. So that is exactly what the problem of power sector. That government had no money, so they could not add capacity, and the act did not allow, that particular act, 1948, did not allow the private sector to come in. So Electricity Act actually made sure that private sector participation in power sector will be possible, we resulted into creating huge capacity. But while we created this capacity, there were some old plants which were operating at suboptimal level. What you call it is a plant load factor. Why? Because they had become too old. And I said, by the time Electricity Act brings in results and brings more capacity, how do you make sure that we start generating capacity more from the existing power plants? So we started a program called Renovation and Modernization of 14,000 megawatts, which ensured that we will be able to get from those power plants more electricity in shortest possible time. That also helped in reducing the power deficit. See, today the situation is from 18% peak level shortage, we have zero peak level shortage. In fact, there is more electricity today than the demand. Why? Because there is more generation capacity available in the country. And why that more generation capacity came? Because from 2000 onwards, 2003 onwards, we could add capacity from private sector. In that time, the state governments could not add more capacity because they didn't have money. So that same situation would have continued today because they didn't have money, they would not add capacity. From 18% shortage, I don't know what would have happened today if you had not introduced that law at that particular time. So that is a success of Electricity Act. But as I said, there was an attendant requirement of bringing distribution reform, which we started, but we could not continue because in 2004, Atal Bihari Vajpayee lost power, and then subsequently we could not continue with the same pace of reforms that we wanted from 2004 2014. Now again, Narendra Modi government is trying to do that, and I'm sure we will now take it forward with that. We also launched at that time a rural electrification program. There was one state which had not only electrification but de-electrification. What is de-electrification? A state had put pillars, some lines, but electricity was never available. So after some time, people removed those poles and used it for something else. So it was a de-electrification. So I said, if we continue with the same pace, it will take 800 years to reach the full electrification. So we launched a rural electrification program, which again Narendra Modi government put it in a very forceful manner, and it happened. We had launched a program, and you mentioned for environment, a special purpose vehicle for forestry, which the coal producing plant like NTPC will produce. We also launched a program for fly ash generation and fly ash utilization, so that the problem that environment faces because of higher generation of fly ash will be properly addressed. So we worked on a very comprehensive package to do this. Today, we are at a stage where generating capacity has reached an optimum level. We can keep adding capacity. We have a major program of 170,000 megawatts of renewable energy. Because Narendra Modi, as Prime Minister, said 100,000 megawatts of solar and 70,000 megawatts of wind. Mind you, we have 300 days of sunshine in India, in most part of the country. So making solar power makes sense. We have 7,600 kilometers of coastline. So onshore as well as offshore wind generation becomes a very good potential. So if you can generate electricity from wind and solar as a renewable source of energy, which will also bring a new dimension to India's electricity sector. But to do that, you have to work on some changes. We need smart grid, because when we are getting so much of renewable energy, which is variable in nature, to provide grid stability, the grid also must be smart. Now there is a great opportunity for India. We can have smart meters at a consumer end. We can have smart grid as a central entity. We can have microgrids working wherein generated electricity from renewable sources can be used by people at their homes, and they can own the grid. They can generate electricity, what you call a distributed generation, or a microgrid. So these are the new opportunities which are coming. There is also a possibility that with the technological advancement, we'll be able to store electricity. Storage of electricity is a new cutting edge technology which is going to transform the way we use electricity. I made a point earlier that the problem of electricity is that the moment you generate, it has to be instantaneously used. But energy storage, which allows us that you can generate and store. And where will it be useful? In case of solar power, when it is sun is shining, it can be generated and can be stored. And the same stored energy can be used in the evening when there is no sun, but the demand is more. So just imagine this particular technological change which is going to happen in the next few years' time is going to bring in a lot of interesting changes. Other dimension of electricity in India is a hydroelectricity. See, India's problem is that we need base load electricity for all times to come. That can easily be provided by thermal electricity, whether it is by coal or even by nuclear. This can be, or it can be done properly. In case of peak level, hydroelectricity is the best form of electricity because hydroelectric plant you can start very quickly, whereas a thermal plant to cold start it takes long time. So if you want to maintain a proper grid balance, generating hydroelectricity is also in India's interest. We have a huge hydro potential, particularly in the northeast of India, particularly in the Himalayan region. So we can generate hydroelectricity, which is clean, which is also going to be used for peak level, and which can also keep the hydro as well as thermal balance in check. So along with renewables, we should try to bring the new source, not new really, but another source of energy, that is hydroelectricity. Also in India, we have got nuclear energy. And nuclear energy, which is not so significant, but still India has a very good potential because if you use fast breeder reactor technology, India has a huge thorium reserves, so we can generate also a substantial part of energy from nuclear sources. Now, therefore, energy mix has to be properly planned. We need thermal from coal, which is more than 50% today, hydroelectricity, renewable energy, and also nuclear energy. All put together can make India a very stable energy using country. And to do that, we need electricity. And now we have a major program for Make in India. The Make in India would mean a lot of companies will come here, or even Indian companies will enhance their capacity for manufacturing. For manufacturing, we will need a lot of electricity. If the electricity is not affordable, is not cheap, we'll never get the best of products for that we want. Electricity Act address this problem. Original Electricity Act, as was passed by the Parliament, had said that we'll remove the crop subsidies. The industry will not have to pay more than what is the economic cost because there will be a regulators. The Electricity Act said every state we must have a regulator. That was the provision of Electricity Act. The regulator must have a hearing through public. So there is a transparency in fixation of tariff, unlike in the past when the tariff was fixed in the ministry. So all wrong things could happen. But today it's a transparent process we said we'll introduce, in which the industry will not have to pay more prices. And if industry pays reasonable price, it will add to more economic activity, which will in turn create more jobs. So this was also the provision of Electricity Act. Along with this, because I think I will have to keep some time for questions, so I will just mention few points and then we'll have some question answer. We introduced another dimension in the power sector changes was energy efficiency law. I also piloted this energy efficiency law bill in the Parliament, and I was the one, when as a minister, we created first ever Bureau of Energy Efficiency. That bureau is now responsible for bringing energy efficiency. Since then we passed this law, India has become really improved a lot in energy efficiency base. Our energy efficiency is now one of the best comparable to many countries in the world, though there is still room for improvement because Japan is one of the best energy efficiency country. But still we have come a long way thanks to that one law that we made. So the point I'm making is reform is a process in which, number one, you must clearly define what is reform. Number two, you must have complete roadmap for reform. So I had prepared a booklet called the Roadmap of Integrated Power Sector Development, which spelled out everything. And in fact, this was like a Bible. It was like a Gita. It was like a Quran. So this was completely spelling out what was really necessary to be done. So one, you must define what is sector reform. Secondly, you must have complete roadmap. Number three, to reforming a sector, you must take all the stakeholders together. Number four, you must factor in all facets of it. Because as I said, reform, the pain is front-ended and the gain is back-ended. So how do you soften the pain of the people? How do you make sure that people become part of the process and not against it? There were people who were against power sector reforms to begin with. But thanks to the huge effort that we did, the outreach that we had, we created stakeholders, we created constituency, we resulted into it. So overall, any reform, any reforming any sector, you need to take into consideration all aspects of it: technological, political, social, economic, administrative, and then only you can make reform process successful. You must always keep in mind that there could be always some hiccups here and there. So constant follow-up, making sure evaluating it all the time is also a necessary ingredient for a successful sectoral reform. So I just thought very briefly, thanks to you, I could reminisce my old ideas and think about them and also revisit some of these issues. But I can tell you something, that India has a tremendous potential to grow. This $5 trillion economy, which are prepared as a vision of Prime Minister Modi for how it will happen, it is definitely doable. And this is something which can really take us into a different league, because per capita income in India must become at least 10,000 plus, $10,000 plus. To reach that level, we need to put in a lot of efforts. And even if we reach $10 trillion, it will be still, we will be far away from that. So therefore, making India's poor benefit from reform is a must. And power sector reform, when I used to meet farmers, the farmer used to tell me that we don't want free power, because free power is a misnomer. We never get power when you talk about free power. So we want power at reasonable price, but don't promise us free power and don't give us any power. So we want reasonable price power. That was a motto of reform. How do you make power affordable to people? How do you make power available to all? To some extent, we have succeeded. I think if you have continued with distribution reform, we have also succeeded in other ways. Because if we had recovered 100% of the power that we sell, then obviously we can reduce the cost of power. And that can happen when we go into the second part of reform. So thank you very much. I will stop here so that I can answer some questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I mean, this is like, I should say, like, you have spent 15 to 20 years in this particular area, and including that other different aspects of it. One thing which I have been always amazed with is the depth with which you have taken and executed these reforms. My question is very fundamental. I mean, I would like to start off with a question, and my question goes back to the fact that the reforms you started in 2002, and now we are almost 18 years. Of course, transmission, generation, and distribution is, we have cracked that problem to some extent, or to maybe that problem is resolved. But at the same time, we, at one hand, Prime Minister Modi is talking about Atmanirbhar Bharat, and on other hand, still majority of the solar cells, or the majority of the technologies, we are still importing. So fundamentally, what is the reason for that, that we are not able to have a self-reliance in technology development within our country? Is it because of the lack of infrastructure, or lack of coordination of ecosystem between academia, research, between industry, between government agencies? So what has been the bottleneck for that particular aspect in a hurdle in the path of our technology development within India?
This is a very valid question. And problem is, what comes first, chicken or egg? See, basically, because we didn't have a renewable energy basket and we didn't have the solar generating capacity, obviously there were no solar produce manufacturers. So photovoltaic manufacturers were not there in India as much. There's some companies who came, but because of our past obligations of trade policy, etc., they were subjected to huge competition coming from other countries. And other countries were able to dump their products at a very cheap rate. So even after using anti-dumping facilities, they were still able to sell their products because they were making huge scaled up production capacity, etc. Now, with clear direction that 100,000 megawatts of solar will try to generate in India, there's a clear market signal. See, the markets are very powerful. They understand the signals very well, and then that on the basis of that signal, entrepreneurs will put up facilities. So now I think very clearly that will change. But there are certain cutting edge areas in which India should take lead in manufacturing in the power sector segment I'm talking about. One is battery storage. Just imagine, in battery storage, no other country, there are a lot of R&D happening in some countries, but manufacturing is not happening on a scale that it will be necessary in the next few years' time. So rather than now following the same treaded path of doing something which other countries are already quite successful in doing, if we start focusing, while of course, let me repeat that point. I am saying we must manufacture solar panels in India and we must encourage manufacturing. While we do all that, we must also now encourage our manufacturing of something like storage in India, which will really be a game changer. And that would be, then we don't have that problem, we'll not face the problem that we face in case of solar panels, because we would have started doing it ahead of time.
Correct.
So that chicken and egg situation will not arise. So I think we should try to focus on it, but the point is well taken.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Next question is from Pradyumna. Please go ahead.
Good evening. This is Pradyum Malpani from Indore. I'm studying law at Symbiosis Law School, Pune. My question to you is, why aren't there any provisions in the Electricity Act that binds the state electricity board to make infrastructure? Right now, what state electricity boards are doing, they're asking local players, be it builders or colonizers, to make the infrastructure from them. They take the infrastructure transfer, and in their books of accounts, they record depreciation on the basis of infrastructure that was made by the builders and the colonizers, and there's no revenue sharing also. So do you think is it a fair process? Shouldn't there be a revenue sharing also?
It's a very good point. In fact, let me tell you, this is a very interesting aspect of the power sector. Is it necessary that every company should try to create same infrastructure? For example, if same village, if there are going to be 3 suppliers of electricity, should we get 3 companies to put same transmission and distribution lines? It is not necessary. It's a waste of national resource and nowhere it can happen. So we said the same infrastructure, what is called is a transmission lines or sub-transmission lines. Any other supplier must be able to use it. If he uses, you have invested the money and I am using it, then I am putting it to disadvantage. So we said what is called technically wheeling charges. So these wheeling charges for using your infrastructure for my transmission of electricity, those wheeling charges should be decided either by you and me, which will be very difficult because you'll ask more and I will like to pay less. So we said regulators must decide. Now, unfortunately, in some states, the regulators are not deciding fair wheeling charges, which is absolutely correct point. If the wheeling charges are decided properly, then this problem that you are mentioning will not happen. In fact, there is a provision in Electricity Act, very clear provision, exactly for this purpose. But ultimately, the act has to be implemented, and the implementation is left to the states, obviously, because it's a concurrent subject. It was earlier even a state subject. It was made concurrent subject subsequently. So now today, what you are saying is a problem which can be solved if the regulators work properly. Let me explain to you this point for the benefit of others. See, for example, if I am the consumer in a particular village or in a particular city, I must have a right to choose a supplier of electricity. Like in case of telecom, you can either take from one operator or second operator or third operator, because there are many operators. As a result of that is a competition. Because there is a competition, it's not allowing anybody to hoodwink the market. In electricity, suppose if the competition is introduced, then what happens? You can decide your own supplier. And because you can decide your own supplier, there will be competition among the suppliers and therefore the prices will be fair. But to get that competition working, the common use of infrastructure through wheeling charges has to happen properly. So there is a provision in Electricity Act, but it is not implemented properly. That's why the problem that you mentioned is arising.
Correct. A very, very important point, sir. Sir, next question is from Rupal. Rupal, can you please unmute yourself and go ahead with your question?
Yes. Namaste, sir. I want to ask.
Rupal, we cannot hear you. There is an audio problem at your end. We cannot hear you, Rupal. Yeah. Can you try again?
Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Namaste, sir. My name is Rupal. I'm studying in ILS Law College. I want to ask you about your current role. So, India is preparing for the G20 presidency in 2022. So, is India ready for this leadership? Also, Also, does it have a clear global positioning in place to lead an international financial agenda?
Can you repeat the question,
Sir,
please?
her question is, sir, that India is preparing for G20 presidency in 2022. So, being in your current role, where you are one of the emissaries to Prime Minister, are we preparing for it? And what is current strategy, especially after COVID, when we are hit hard by economic sectors? How are we preparing for our presidency in G20 coming up in 2022?
Actually, 2022, India will be celebrating the 75th year of India's independence. So it's a very landmark year for India. So this year the presidency is with Saudi Arabia. Next year it will go to Italy and then it will come to India. So if in the last budget, if you remember, Finance Minister had provided more than 100 crores for
Yes.
preparing for G20. So there is a lot of thought going on. Prime Minister himself is very keen because in G20 is a group of 20 countries representing 86% of the global GDP.
Yes.
So this is a very important grouping where we do it. Now we have started a preparation for it. We are actually doing a lot of outreach program to understand because there will be a lot of issues which of India's concern and also the concern of those poor countries who are not part of G20, but India has always been their voice. India has been always talking not only for her own concern, but also the concern of the humanity, which also needs to be protected. Therefore, we are having a lot of programs with our many institutions, which we are trying to understand what are the issues India should take up for India and for those who are not members of G20, but whose voice must be heard within G20. So we are working on all that, and that preparation is already on. In fact, within the next few months, there will be an interesting. What happens is there's a provision in which the next year Italy presidency, then the previous presidency will be Saudi Arabia, and the next one will be India. So that troika will start working together. So this again will happen in the next few months' time. But we are very, very keen on working on G20 agenda. Prime Minister Modi has been acknowledged by more or less all the countries in the world as a figure who really is respected by all. So therefore, we like to work under his leadership and take G20, India's presidency, as the most memorable and successful one.
Thank you, sir. Good luck for your preparation, and we hope India will be one of the will have presidency by 2022. Rugved, please. His question is in regards to the similar topic. Rugved, can you please go ahead?
Mr. Prabhu, namaste, sir. Rugved Upadhyay here, law student from ILS Pune. Sir, recently I went through an interview which you gave in 2014 to a media house. When the first Modi government was about to be sworn in, just after the elections, wherein you spoke of an idea of constituting an international body of countries having massive solar energy potential. Uh, then the consequence of it, you said, would be the crashing of the prices of the solar panels and hence the prices of the CSP, concentrated solar power. Later in 2015, the International Solar Alliance was initiated by India. So my question to you, sir, is twofold. Do you think the International Solar Alliance, ISA, has been able to accomplish the various purposes which were envisaged? And number two, what are the prospects, as in what are the various expectations from the ISA, and what are the challenges before the ISA in the post COVID-19 pandemic world? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Let me give you the brief background to this. When Mr. Narendra Modi was the Chief Minister of Gujarat, he mooted this idea. And then he mooted his idea, he wrote a letter to the then Prime Minister that we should try to create International Solar Alliance. Unfortunately, nothing happened. So in between, when you gave me this, we are talking about it. I am the founding chairman of a think tank called Council for Energy, Environment and Water. So I was trying to propagate through this Mr. Modi's idea. But when he became the Prime Minister, he gave a concrete shape to it. International Solar Alliance is a reality. It's the first global organization, international intergovernmental organization, which is based in India. France is one of our close collaborators in this. And there are many countries, developing countries that have joined it. The idea is that if all countries together commit to generating solar electricity, the prices will fall because the scale brings down the prices, as it happened in mobile phones. The mobile phones, almost 6-7 billion people use mobile phones in the world, prices have crashed. So prices crashed because of the proliferation by more number of people using it. The same iPhone was going to be used by 100,000 people and not 1 billion people. What would be the price of mobile phone would have been much, much higher. So Solar Alliance idea is that it will bring technology partners, it will bring financing partners, it will bring countries together. It has succeeded a great deal, but you will see that technology innovation that is going to happen through International Solar Alliance, which is based in India, which is run by a very efficient IAS officer, past retired IAS officer, Mr. Upendra Tripathi, and Mr. Narendra Modi as a Prime Minister has really given a tremendous push to this idea, and Solar Alliance is a reality today. The prospects are huge. In fact, on coming Monday, I'm speaking in a webinar on International Solar Alliance, wherein the global participants are there, and I'm going to give an inaugural address. So I think this is a very good opportunity for us to work on it. India will be the beneficiary because if the technology changes, the storage come in and the CSP that you talked about, concentrated solar power, if it comes in a big way, you can imagine over a period of time, almost all power can be supplied by solar energy. That will be a transformative step. It will be good for environment because it doesn't emit greenhouse gases. It will be cheap for people and it will be available throughout. So there is no fuel cost because solar power is free. The sun is not charging you any royalty. It's giving you free sunshine. So this will be a game changer.
Correct, sir. One thing is though, like we are still heavily reliable on coal, and I think that will also balance out our dependency on the coal because we have been using coal for a good amount of time now. So we are moving towards the end of our session. So we will take maybe another 1 or 2 questions, and then we will.
Only one because I have to go for another webinar.
Okay, sir. So Yogesh, can you go ahead? Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah. Yes.
So very good evening, sir. We are really happy to have you here. Yes. So I'm Yogesh Moore. I'm PhD student at ISL Pune. My question to you broadly lies in two segments. One is affordability of solar energy to the common tribal rural zone, and second will be the technology integration. Sir, in your action plan, you broadly spoke about
I think your voice is cracking.
Yogesh, you are breaking. There is some internet issue at your end, but I think his question is similar to what Sir was mentioning about he's asking about solar panel affordability and the technology integration aspect. So I think Sir mentioned.
I will just tell you this. See, basically, if you have noticed over a period of time, the solar prices have crashed dramatically. But there is something which is there are two kinds of solar that we can generate. One is through photovoltaics and one through solar thermal. There is a still potential available for solar thermal. The solar photovoltaic efficiency, which can again rise dramatically, and if that efficiency goes up, so say about more than 25%, for example, it can go up even more with the advancement of technology. If today 17-18% become 25-30% over a period of time, you can imagine the transformation that will happen because prices will be the efficiency level going up. Prices again will be cheaper for solar power. So that is one part. The second part is integration part of technology that you are asking, and that will happen through smart grid. See, the smart grids are very, very important, which I mentioned, to get different kinds of electricity into it and also variability of demand and supply. See, the problem demand supply is because instant change is used. But with storage, again, that will change. So, we are in a very interesting phase wherein new technological innovations are happening. Power sector is going to be completely different. I don't think in the next 20 years' time, you'll see the centralized grid like this. There'll be more microgrids. There will be more decentralized grids. So this is what is going to happen over a period of time. So we are at the cusp of a change that is phenomenal, and we cannot even imagine how the change will be.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time. I think you have given us, you're always full of energy, and I hope we will be energy efficient as a country and the young community and young professional. We will involve everyone. We will try to innovate and inspire the upcoming generation of India. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, sir. And we look forward talking to you again in future. Thank you, sir.
Again, my request is keep thinking like you are doing.
Yes.
You are the thinker.
Think and thrive. Think and thrive is the way to go.
Keep thinking, and then I will